I'm sorry for my language. What the F is this?
The housing crisis in Ontario is actually insane. Like, it's actually not even funny. If you are someone who is looking to buy a home or just rent a place to live, you have likely felt the weight of this disaster. Now, mind you, as someone who moved from my hometown to Toronto, I was like, oh, there's so many opportunities. I'm gonna be in the big city. And also, I moved there for a new job opportunities. So I was just like, eyes full of stars, just so excited to move. And lo and behold, a year later, I've essentially been priced out of the city and I'm back in my hometown. It just goes to show, from the skyrocketing rents to government inaction, this situation is unsustainable. It can't keep going on like this. So here I am, I get a new job opportunity and it's a hybrid role, and obviously it requires me to move to Toronto. So I'm like, say less, I'm gonna pack it up. But for full context, they gave me about 10 days to move. So I had 10 days to find a new place to live. And if you're someone who has tried finding an apartment in Toronto, you understand how noodles the market is. Like, it is so quick. A unit that's posted 12 hours ago might not be there by the end of the day. So I was messaging a bunch of people. I was reaching out to realtors. I was reaching out to private listings. I was on Kijiji, Craigslist, like literally anything possible. So my idea was, I'm gonna sublet a unit first, and then once I'm in the city, use the opportunity and like any free time that I have to go to apartment viewings. When I tell you, the place that I sublet was absolutely disastrous. It was going to be a shared unit in a giant loft, okay? So it was like 2 bedroom, 3 bath. I did an interview with the girl that I would be rooming with, who ended up being the landlord. And everything was perfect. We set boundaries. We were like, no men in the apartment, literally ever. We said no smoking because I have chronic asthma. Just very like basic stuff. I have never felt more bamboozled in my entire life. Like, it was genuinely not a good living situation for me. I think if I was more extroverted and enjoyed partying and like to mix and mingle with a lot of people, it would have been great. But I am someone that when I come home, I want peace and quiet. I don't want a man in my space of living. I don't want strangers in my space of living. I don't want people staying overnight in a place where I pay $1 trillion a month for privacy. I think I moved in by October and I was out by November. I literally could not take it anymore. I move into a new place. It's perfect. I find a new roommate. Everything is settled. But within a few months, our landlord texted us and said, hey, I'm actually moving back in. Pack your stuff and go. So I was just like, wow, moving in this city is such a headache. Like, I have never truly felt settled in Toronto, just because of all of the ins and outs and the difficulties that I've experienced with trying to find a long-term place. And that was the situation. I was rushed into finding a place because of how quick the market is and just how unforgiving it is as well. The moment I would submit my ID for a multitude of different rental applications, the amount of times I was told, we don't rent to people like you, oh my days. That also just made things so much more stressful than they should have been. I think that contributed to how difficult it was for me to find a space. When I was posting about it on TikTok and people were like, well, maybe you should try Mississauga, or have you considered Oakville? The answer to racism or to classism shouldn't be, okay, well, you gotta get out. If other people are living comfortably in this area, why can't I? Why do I need to bend over backwards to find a place to live? Landlords are able to demand 1 trillion things from you, including 6 months upfront, 12 months upfront, or just outright reject you because you are not the type of person that they like to rent to. And that just leaves us with very little options, which only makes things even worse for us as renters, considering that there's only 1% of vacancy left for available homes. It's honestly just a snowball effect of things that are just getting worse and worse and worse, because the renter protections right now, especially in Ontario, they're not too great. I just know that it is out of control all over the place. Like, I'm looking at Vancouver. I'm looking at places in Nova Scotia. I'm like, what are we doing here? How did it get to this point? It's actually nuts when you compare the difference in price from 2013, when a 1 bedroom was $1,600, and then you fast forward to 2023, when an average 1 bedroom is $2,500 in Toronto. That is an increase of $900 in just 10 years. And then for all unit types, from bachelor apartments to 3-bedroom apartments, the average rose from $1,894 in 2013 to $2,984 in 2022. That is an increase of $1,000 in just a decade. I honestly think that's the most irritating part about this, is that rent is increasing way faster than wages are. And all this does is leave renters absolutely stretched thin. In Ontario, population growth has outpaced housing development for decades, okay? In fact, the Financial Post recently reported that, unfortunately, since the 1990s, Canada has consistently fallen short in building enough housing to match the population demand. And unsurprisingly to no one, vacancy rates are now at 1%. That literally means that only 1% of homes in Canada are vacant for people to move into. And just like that, renters are left with such a little pool of available homes that they can move into. However, this crisis could be eased with better policies. Let me give you guys an example. The federal government created the Housing Accelerator Fund to help cities build homes faster. So I believe they allocated $4 billion to this fund to help cities design and create and build homes at a quicker pace than they have been in the past. But Doug Ford's government rejected millions of dollars in funding for Ontario. You might be asking, why did he do that? Ford claims, word for word, that it is about maintaining provincial control. But in reality, it's the people in Ontario who pay the price. The Ontario government has vetoed solutions that could actually help the housing crisis. So another example is that Premier Doug Ford rejected the federal government's proposal of the Tenant Bill of Rights. So this would essentially provide protections for renters. And you know what Brody said? He described this bill as a form of creeping into jurisdictional matters. He said, and I quote, I'm going to look at the quote right here, "Focus on their responsibilities and we'll focus on ours. We'll support the municipalities," so the cities. He's not supporting the municipalities in ways that could actually help renters. This is honestly one example of many that is very upsetting for a lot of people. This plan could have provided much needed support for renters in Ontario, but Ford rejected it outright. Just see you later. Bye-bye. Instead of working with the federal government to maybe address some of the concerns or coming up with his own solutions or a different proposal, that was just tossed away into the trash, never to be seen again. As someone who is essentially a potential renter and has rented in the past, it's very upsetting for me to see the current Conservative provincial government is doubling down on policies that don't protect or advocate for affordable housing. Let's not forget, this is the same premier who rejected a bill that would have allowed for more fourplexes to be built in single-family neighborhoods, a move that could have significantly eased the housing shortage in urban centers. And his reasoning was that it would make the neighborhoods look ugly. Are we serious? We're having a housing crisis right now. Like, we literally need them. It's not a case of, oh, the aesthetic. I want to be able to walk in my neighborhood and look at it. We need the homes, everybody. Like, we're going through a housing crisis. If you're going through a housing crisis, what should you do? Build houses. And yet, not only is he rejecting bills, he's rejecting funding, and then rejecting proposals as well. What are we supposed to do?
What the hell we gonna do now?
Instead, Ford has pushed for more sprawling development on the Greenbelt, which is, as we know, a very controversial decision that has very little impact on immediate housing affordability and plenty of environmental consequences. Still not going to benefit anybody, because with all of the development that they're going to do in that specific area, it's just going to bump up the cost of living and the prices. So there goes housing affordability. And then on top of that, you're destroying the environment. So, and unfortunately, as I said before, this is not just a Toronto problem. Rents across the entire country are skyrocketing. In Vancouver, the average rent for a 1-bedroom is $2,610. I'm like, who can afford that? Mind you, the quality of these apartment buildings aren't even as good as they used to be. You're spending that much money for a place that might literally fall apart, might have a bunch of maintenance issues. It's not just an issue in these big cities. Even other cities like Halifax and Calgary are seeing massive rent increases as people are fleeing expensive urban centers. A lot of people say, if you can't afford the rent in Toronto or Vancouver, why don't you move to Sarnia? Are we serious? The solution to this issue is not to price people out into smaller cities, because as a result, the rent in those smaller cities is also going to increase. The solution is more housing everywhere. We can't be at a point when we only have a 1% vacancy in homes. That's not acceptable. Especially with Canada's growing population, we need to advocate for more housing. As I said before, housing is a provincial issue, which means each province has the power to make real change, but they need to step up. The federal government has introduced the Housing Accelerator Fund, as I mentioned before, as a way to help the municipalities. This is supposed to help the municipalities to build more homes by speeding up permit approvals and changing zoning laws. So here's an example. London, Ontario has already been approved to receive $74 million to build 2,000 more housing units over the next 3 years. That is a step in the right direction. So what I'm really optimistic about is more cities taking advantage of this, and I understand how difficult it has been thus far, considering that the federal government literally had to go around him and other premiers to get the ball rolling to help with the housing crisis. That should tell you all you need to know about how much other provincial governments really need to step on the gas. It's kind of sad to think about. In the 1990s, Canada used to build way more social housing for low and middle income families, but that has all stopped. So I really do believe that Canada needs to bring that back, with the provinces leading the charge to fund and build more homes. I genuinely believe that we need to strengthen the rent control laws to prevent price gouging and make it easier for tenants to report unsafe or unlivable conditions without the fear of retaliation. So many people have expressed how long it takes to hear back from the landlord and tenant board, taking a year to multiple years just to get your case closed. So I think there honestly does need to be better ways for tenants to report any issues that they're going through, as well as making sure that landlords can't just increase the price of your rent from $2,000 to $2,600 over the span of a year just because there's no rent control in that building. Why is renting or just living in Canada so difficult for a lot of people? I honestly think it's a mix of the unaffordable rents, government inaction, as well as missed opportunities. For me personally, it meant having to give up on Toronto temporarily and move back to my hometown just because it was so unsustainable at that time. And it's not something that I thought I'd ever do, and it's not something that a lot of people can do. There are so many people who wish that they could just up and leave and move back to their family home, but they can't. And that is the problem. We still have to be optimistic. This crisis is solvable. With that being said, if you have any advice that you would like to share, please leave them in the comments down below. I would love to keep this conversation going and just encourage a push for change. But yes, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video. Until next time, stay informed, stay resilient, and let's continue to fight for housing as a human right.